Some argue that biotic processes are the key to explaining the higher biodiversity of the tropics. The reasoning goes like this. In the temperate zone, abiotic factors such as cold temperatures and lack of light limit populations of plants and animals and drive the evolution of adaptations. Migration of birds, for example, is an adaptation to the lack of fruit, insects, and other food during the temperate winter. In the tropics, on the other hand, abiotic conditions are more favorable. There is no prolonged freeze, and in rainforests, no prolonged drought that can challenge a species' ability to survive. Instead, pressures to adapt tend to come from interactions with other organisms, species that might compete with you for food or try to prey on you. So it's thought that biotic pressures more strongly influence evolution in the tropics compared to the temperate zone. The possibility that competition is more intense in the tropics has led to a popular hypothesis for why the tropics are more diverse. It's the niche diversification hypothesis. Recall that the definition of a niche is the multidimensional space occupied by a species. For example, a bird's niche is marked by the food it eats, the locations where it nests, its sources for drinking water, and so forth. Competition occurs when two species utilize the same limited resource. In theory, the species better able to exploit the resource will thrive and eventually drive the other species extinct, a process known as competitive exclusion. Only if the weaker competitor can find an alternative resource will it be able to persist. Predation is another biotic interaction that may give rise to higher biodiversity, and not just in the tropics. Predators, like jaguars and eagles, aren't terribly picky when it comes to the prey they will eat. As long as it's the right size, they'll basically eat whatever they can catch. By simple probability, predators are more likely to encounter the most abundant prey species. Higher predation on the most abundant prey species reduces competition with the less abundant prey species, thus opening up niche space so that they can survive. Consider, for example, a large cat that preys on both rabbits and deer. Both rabbits and deer eat grass, so ostensibly they compete. But rabbits are more abundant than deer because they reproduce more quickly. The cat thus encounters and eats more rabbits than deer, and by doing so opens up space for the deer to coexist alongside rabbits. By knocking back populations of the most abundant prey, predation prevents competitive exclusion from occurring and allows multiple prey species to coexist. In this way, predation helps to maintain biodiversity. Since biotic factors may be relatively more important in tropical forests than temperate ones, the competition and predation hypotheses may help explain why tropical forests are more diverse. Despite all the scientific study on biodiversity, we still do not know how many species there are on planet Earth. New species are being discovered all the time, and others are likely going extinct before anyone even notices them. Estimates range from 5 to 50 million, although only about 1.5 million have been formally described. Why is it so hard to know how many species there are? Well, first, because rare is common and common is rare. Many species occur in small geographic areas and have small population sizes. The more we search, the more species we find, but finding the very last species has eluded us. Secondly, there's a very high diversity of very tiny things, insects, fungi, and microorganisms to name a few. They simply are hard to see unless you look hard enough and have the proper equipment. Lastly, it takes a high level of expertise to identify an organism once you've found it. If you pick an insect off a leaf and you don't know what it is, how would you find out if it's a new species or not? Where would you start? It takes a certain level of knowledge to begin identifying something, and lots of detailed knowledge to be able to separate something new from many other species that might be quite similar. What we do know is that the wide variety of ecosystems on the planet are shaped not only by climate, but by the species they contain. The species composition of a forest determines its structure and function, as well as the natural resources it provides to human well-being.